Dr. Jerry Glover in Hawaii at Hawaii Pacific University, who are hosting a great conference with the International Society for Organization Development. And Jerry is also there with Lena, who is leader for the ISOD. And then we also have Bowling Green State University in our master's program, which I get to teach in, and which gives me the time to work with so much great stuff and people and so forth, and the Nexus for Change organization. And then we've got the Trompenauers Hampton Turner, and is also one of the sponsors. So Jerry, you want to say hi and just tell us a little bit about the school and the title, just a real brief one. And Lena, if there's anything you want to say about ISOD and anything you want to say as we get started.
Well, I think mainly to say that we are trying something here to have a live workshop with a webinar also embedded in it. The third thing we're going to try to do is to have an open course site for people who, after today, may decide they want to continue to look into culture and assessing culture and find out more about it. We're going to have that open January 6th, and it'll be open for approximately a month. And on that site, we'll have interesting videos about culture. We'll have articles, cases from a lot of the world authorities on it. I have a video from Gert Hofstede. I have several videos from Von Stropinaars and Maureen O'Hara. Different people like that will be providing videos that you might want to go and look at. We'll also have a threaded discussion site where we'll be looking at key issues, and you can post key issues that you'd like to have us discuss. And we'll be able to have a dialogue of interested parties for approximately a month of January, starting January 6th. And you'll get a notice from Nexus for Change in a few days telling you about the URL to get into that particular site. We welcome you to attend that, and it's one of those things that we wanted to build into this so we can have a continuing dialogue and not just an hour together. So we're hoping that this will lead us into establishing networks and relationships about the whole topic and continuing. I will do my best to get some of my colleagues to be on those threaded discussions in that online course site. And so you may get a chance to interact directly with some of them, like people like Von Stropinaars and Peter Williams and so forth. Okay. So
it'll all be in one location.
Yes.
And that'll come out with everybody registered for the webinar plus those participants in the room. We'll be sending a link to that space so everybody can go there and
it'll
chat.
be available to the people who registered and participate in the webinar today and in the webinar tomorrow. And the webinar tomorrow, as you may know, is about applications of cultural competency, whereas today we're talking about assessing culture.
Great, great. And Lena, who has been doing a great job for ISOD and bringing ISOD out into the world more and playing more of a role, really helped us get this happening today. Lena, you want to say hi and tell us a little bit about ISOD?
Thank you so much, Steve. Yes, once again, we're just ecstatic about having our last 2013 conference here in Honolulu at Hawaii Pacific University. So once again, a big thank you to Hawaii Pacific University for their great hosting and support for this. And we have had over 60 people attending the conference with just terrific presentations all the way around. And I just want to say, if you have a chance, go out to the website. That is www.theisod.org for more information about upcoming conferences, and we'll also have a wrap-up about this conference. So go sign up, and we'll make sure you get more information. Thank you.
Great, great, great. Okay, so last thing, let's jump in before we jump into content is chat room. We've got a lot of people out there. As you're listening, curious, what question do you bring today that you're most curious about? What's that one question you bring? And as you're listening, if you're coming up with new questions, observations, reflections, a resource you want to share, a cool tip or best practice, put it all in there in the chat room. We'll watch it and we'll be checking in every 20 minutes to bring that into the conversation. And with that, I think we should turn it on over to Dr. Glover and your slides, and we'll go ahead and jump into assessing culture, change initiatives,
Okay.
organizational culture, and sociocultural encounters.
Thank you, Steve. Well, I'm pleased to be able to speak with you today, and we will stop periodically and we'll answer questions. We do have a little exercise for the latter 20 minutes or so where we're going to show you some examples of cultural situations and then ask for you to think about, discuss, and perhaps ask questions about what was going on there.
Okay. And Dr. Glover, something should have popped up on your screen to say, okay, show my screen.
Yep, got it. I've got it. Now, can everyone see that okay?
Yep, there we are. We see your screen.
All right, good. And so I'm going to start right away because we've got a lot to talk about. Basically,
Dr. Glover, if you want to, you can maximize your screen. We can, and that would work just fine.
Okay. All right.
Right there. Right. The one to the left. To the left. To the left. To the left.
Okay,
right there.
Yeah. There you go.
Yep.
Now,
perfect. There you go. Good to go.
All right. So hopefully that works for everyone. We're going to go through this introductory material about what we need to know about culture before we start to assess it. Then we're going to look at operationalizing cultural values through using values dimensions. We're going to then consider the concept of sociocultural encounters and cultural dilemmas. And then we're going to look at using those scenarios in the measurement of culture. The work that we'll cover today is based on research that I've done, that Von Strompenars has done, that my colleague Dr. Tusi sitting next to me has done. So we've worked around the world in a variety of situations with the particular methodology we're using, and we'll be happy to share information with you on the online course site that'll open January 6th, and we'll be glad to dialogue further on it if you have more in-depth questions or want any assistance in doing some of the things yourself. Okay. What do we need to know? Basically, these slides that I'm going to cover first are about some of the important points that we need to consider before we start to assess culture. And the reason why I cover these is because there's a lot of misunderstandings that are out there due to disciplinary, academic disciplines, professional and national perceptions of what culture is, and particularly how you might want to analyze or assess it. And I think it's important to give us a few minutes to establish a foundation of understanding why our method is being used. Just very briefly, and I won't go into great detail on some of the slides because of time, but from the earliest societies, humans have attempted to explain the differences between us and them. Even in 1565, the Pope decreed that non-European peoples were actually human, which was interesting. Human differences can be expressed, of course, as we know, in physical differences, how we dress and so forth, and many observable features. But of course, there's a deeper level of culture that we're also going to talk about today. The organized study of culture in Western societies had its origins probably in anthropology in the 1800s. There's many other non-Western traditions for the study of human culture that developed around the world, including Chinese, Islamic, and Pacific Island societies, where they attempted to explain differences among peoples. Okay, one of the first places I'm going to start is put it in perspective. Paul Bohannon, an anthropologist, wrote a book in the 90s called How Culture Works, and I think it's a very good perspective. He basically says, and I paraphrase for him, first there's matter, then there's life, and then there's culture. Julian Stewart, in the Theory of Culture Change, explains that all men eat, but this is an organic and a cultural fact. What we really are looking at, of course, is that the different groups of people do indeed eat according to their own historical and environmental factors. Edward Hall, a famous anthropologist as well, talks about that. I won't read this to you. You can look up the source if you like. That basically it's important to know about the models that men use to create and explain nature. We'll tell you a lot about them. In the West, we are concerned with certain models, particularly a linear logical system, which in many times in other societies they're more concerned with more holistic and less linear and more of a different perspective. One of the things we're going to look at are the differences among people in culture, and of course one of the great quotes was by F. Scott Fitzgerald, basically holding two ideas in your mind at the same time is what you're dealing with when you deal with a cultural dilemma. One other thing Bohannon talks about is the fact that culture is adaptive until the context changes so that it's no longer adaptive. And one of the things people get involved in are cultural traps. And cultural traps happen all around the world, and they happen in academic situations, and they happen among people who do business or who study culture or who run governments. And that is that our past success keeps us from seeing changes in their environment, and thus we then get into a cultural trap that doesn't enable us to see the need for looking beyond that. I think these are all some very basic fundamental quotes from different people about culture, and I highly recommend reading any of them. We will post these slides so that you can get the direct quotes and so forth. We'll post those on the site on January 6th, as well as they'll be part of the recording. So in summary, why is understanding and assessing culture difficult? Because all humans are inculcated into the explanations of the world and of other people according to their own culture. Academics and disciplines and other belief systems develop their own paradigms and explanations for human differences. For example, in the U.S., historically, individualism values have been put into many studies that have been done to explain why people are motivated. Therefore, much of the early literature on motivation in the U.S. was very much biased toward an individual perspective and not toward collective approaches. And when those motivation theories have been taken out around the world, many people have found that they don't apply or don't work well because the people there are collective and see things differently. Cultural relativity is an important concept. The holistic perspective is an important concept because they really mean that we have to look at all humans when we're studying human culture, and we have to have models that we explain all human variation and not just what happens in our own society. Okay, so how do we measure culture? How do we assess it? We need to develop a globally appropriate and culturally relative perspective, take into account all the different biases that might possibly be there. We need to have a model that explains levels of culture. We need to focus on some area that allows us to operationalize culture, and we focus on cultural values and cultural values dimensions. We use socio-cultural encounters, which are really critical points in any situation where two or more people meet and interact. We use methods to collect and analyze those social cultural encounters, which I'll show you in a few minutes. Okay, what is our approach? Well, our approach is based on the work of a number of people, as you'll see there. I will not go into it, but certainly recommend reading and looking into any of those particular people. I want to make a note that there are different ways of measuring culture and assessing culture. We're presenting to you one that we've developed through our years of research and through our interactions with other people who've done the same thing. I particularly have been fortunate to work with von Stropiners over the years, and Peter Williams and Charles Hampton Turner have contributed a lot to my thinking about the way to do these things. And certainly people like Gerd Husted and others are very valuable as well. But as you can see, the number one way that was initially used to assess culture was ethnography and participant observation. And they certainly still remain very good tools. And we'll talk about them shortly. Okay, so our method is very simple. We define culture in a way that allows it to be operationalized. We use cultural dimensions to get at the critical points, social and cultural encounters. And then we identify cultural dilemmas, which then enable us to create assessments and tools to measure culture. Some considerations, as we said, you try to avoid the biases of your own culture, and that own culture also includes maybe nationality, ethnicity, professional training, and so forth. We need to know our own cultural values before we can begin to assess the cultural values of others. and we need to know agendas and motivations of people who are working in the field or who are expecting the cultural assessment to be done. We need to account for stereotyping because it's quite easy to stereotype. However, we live in fairly heterogeneous societies, so we have to account for the fact that many times, even though, for example, the U.S. is considered to be individualistic, there's a lot of collective orientation as well among many people in the U.S. And we need to maintain cultural relativity in the methods, meaning very simply that if we set up a cultural dimension, for example, between individual and collective, then we need to be able to realize that all human behavior falls somewhere between the extreme opposites of those two poles. Now, the first thing we'll use is something that was developed by Ed Schein. I'm sorry, wait a minute. Okay, hold on. That was out of sequence there, but anyway. How do we define culture? Culture is basically learned ways. Okay, culture is basically learned ways. The same, there wouldn't be that much need to do it, to assess culture. If you look at the fundamentals of understanding culture, we start with human groups. They develop cultural knowledge.
Jerry,
yeah.
Can I interrupt you? You might want to back up a second. Somehow in your room, somebody turned on a speaker or somebody was playing you over and it started repeating itself. I'm not sure how that happened. But we lost you. If you go back one slide and start back, that'd be great.
Okay, well, it's not doing it now. So you say
no, we're good now. We lost you for about a slide.
Okay. This one?
Yeah, start right there and then go for it. That's good.
All right. Basically, culture culture would be generally defined as learned ways that we use to solve problems of daily existence. It's shared knowledge that we have about short and long-term adaptation, and the fact is that different groups have different historical and social contexts, which have caused them to have different cultural forms. And of course, that's the essence for why we're trying to measure culture. Now, culture to me is the main course in understanding human behavior. It's the place where we start. To go back to Bohannon's quote about matter, life, and then culture, that means that culture is essentially what's made us human. Culture is not something that is a component of an organization. Culture is part of the knowledge that we have, which includes technology, strategy, systems, structures, and processes, which enable organizations to operate and adapt. So keep in mind that culture is the baseline of what we're dealing with when we're looking at organizations, and all the things that we see next, the technology, strategy, systems, structures, processes, all come from cultural values and beliefs about how the world should be. Edgar Schein uses a model, which I like, which explains the levels. There's, of course, first of all, explicit culture, the outside, things we see, the artifacts, the products, and so forth. Then we have inside that onion the norms and the values, which are what's important to people. What are the expectations for how people should behave? And then there's the underlying implicit culture, which are the basic assumptions that people hold about how to deal with the world. Trompionnars explains that every culture really distinguishes itself by the solutions it chooses to solve problems. Those problems fall into three categories according to Fons: relationships with other people, those that deal with the passage of time, and those that relate to the environment. And Trompionnars also says that the problems in dealing with time, nature, and other human beings are shared. Their solutions aren't. So basically, what we're dealing with is trying to understand those three areas. Cultural dimensions are the first area we want to talk about since we very quickly define culture. Cultural dimensions are that important part of the values. Their dimensions relate, they really should be termed cultural value dimensions. And human behavior is really the expression of those values. And cultural values, as I said before, involve what's important to humans. Human behaviors for all societies fit within the range of variation of human values. For example, universal, particular, and individual, collective, and so forth. Cultural differences often create cultural dilemmas when people who don't share the same values come into contact with one another in social cultural encounters. Tropinar's system of what he calls the 7D model is what we normally use, and the one I've used for a number of years. You can see there, we're going to come back and explain the first two in particular. We'll also have more information about the rest of the values there on the online course site January 6th. But if you're interested, of course, Tropinar's wrote a book called Writing the Ways of Culture. He also has a number of other books which explain these cultural values dimensions in detail. Universal particular, we're going to talk about in just a minute, but it basically means, is there one set of rules for doing things, or do we make exceptions based on relationships and so forth? And I'll go into these others in just a second. We're going to see in a few minutes, we're going to see a video from Fierce Creatures with John Cleese, which explains a universal particular cultural dilemma. Universal particularism is probably well explained by a case that von Strumpiners has used for years, and that is that you're driving along, imagine you're driving along with a friend, and that friend is speeding in the car, and there's an accident. And while you're waiting for the police to come, you have to decide, will you admit to the police that your friend is speeding? And of course, what we really are talking about is a situation where if your values say the rules are rules and we must stick by the rules, then you would be universalistic in that particular situation. If you say, no, my friend is a friend and I must support that friend, it's an exception, so I won't tell the police that he was speeding. And does that make a difference? Well, in the way, or is there a difference in the way that people respond to that particular item? Well, von Strumpiners has used this particular dilemma with 100,000 people around the world in something like 60-some countries, and you can see the results of people who responded to that particular question on the chart. As you can see, if you go to the top of the chart, in some countries they're very universalistic. Switzerland, Canada, USA, Sweden, United Kingdom. You can see that the percentage of people responding that the friend has no right to have help would be those countries. If you see where more particularistic countries, China, Russia, Venezuela, so forth, you'll see that a much smaller number of people responded that the friend would have no right for the help, that they would respond instead that the friend would have right to the help. So that's an example of universal particular. Going further with the universal particular, because it's such an, going further, we go to the universal, the next cultural dimension, and that's individualism, collectivism, sometimes called individualism, communitarianism. And we get involved in those types of situations for that dilemma all the time. Do we have individuals or teams? How are people more productive? Do we use performance appraisal based on individual or collective? Do we have individual heroes or reconcilers? One of the great examples, I think, of individualism versus collectivism is when we look at offices around the world and how they're organized. Are people organized into individual cubicles, or are they in a greater, wider, more open space? That's a good reflection of individualism and collectivism. We'll see a movie clip again later on in a few minutes. that has to do with individual collectivism on Japanese and American softball team. So what we're looking at with individual collective is the self over society or society over self, which is a very simple way of putting it. I'm not going to go into that example because I've already explained the differences there. And when Tusi and I did work around the Pacific, we often ran into this being an issue. For example, once we were dealing with the U.S. Forest Service project where the a local expatriate, or not a local expatriate, but an expatriate working locally had asked a local Fijian village to come in and do work in clearing a field. And he had said, come the next day and I'll pay X amount of workers, Y amount of money in Z amount of time. And the situation was such that the next day the expatriate opened his door and there were 40 able-bodied men and the chief to do the work of what he had requested for 3 men. The Western expatriate obviously had an idea that he wanted to follow in terms of how work should be organized, and the local Fijians had a different idea. Turns out that they thought they could do all the work together in a group way and then go on. He wanted to pay them individually and only use a few people. So you find these types of situations all over the world. Now, we are going to take just a minute now and take a break from the presentation and see if there are any questions that Lena or any of the other people want to bring up.
Jerry, you know, we have an honored guest with us, and that is Tusi. You had mentioned Tusi, but I don't know that we've introduced him yet. So would you be so kind as to introduce Tusi to the webinar audience?
Dr. Tusi?
Hi.
Would you care to say more?
We'd love to also hear his, and if he has any reflections on what he's heard so far, anything he'd want to contribute from what he's heard. And we do have some comments out in the chat room. If anybody has any questions or reflections, we can share some of those as well. And while Tusi is saying a little hello, I'll look at that, and we'll look at the chat room and see if we want to share anything after
the audience. Aloha.
Tusi, anything brilliant you've heard so far?
Jerry learned well.
Tusi's taught me all I know.
Well, maybe another way to ask the question is, what if you were to pick one, 2, or 3 points that are really important for people based on what was shared so far? What would be the 1, 2, or 3 things that you think it's important for people to be mindful of based on what's been shared so far?
Yeah, go ahead. Individual particular. I think that we ran into that more often in the islands, and the other one was, or not so much the individual particular, but the universal particular. The region is very heavily collective, and yet many of the rules, policies, procedures, and regulations in the informal organizations and businesses are very individualistic. So the tensions were extraordinary. But the reconciliation approach I felt was most effective.
Okay, we're going to, Tusi's going to participate a lot more tomorrow on the projects where we're going to talk about some of the places where we've applied a cultural understanding into the use of, into the actual application of change projects and change initiatives and so forth.
Right, and so I think a couple points here real quick, Jerry. One person said, which might be appropriate for tomorrow maybe, but PT says, in assessing and comparing cross-cultural aspects, how does one achieve cultural neutrality, informing the assessment questions and statistical methodologies?
What was that, cultural neutrality?
Yeah, informing the assessment questions and statistical methodologies.
Well, that's probably one of the things that requires a degree of sophistication, not only in terms of understanding, you know, the scope and nature of culture, but also a great deal of practice. I can give you one example here. I did a study using this system with the Australian Air Force back in the late 90s, and we had a group of approximately 15 people as a project team from the organization, as well as a few outside so-called experts on the subject. and we got together for 3 days in a conference room in Canberra. After we had gone around and elicited dilemmas, we got together and attempted to form the questions that were going to eventually be a 40-item questionnaire. We struggled on some were easy, but the whole issue of having culture neutrality is very difficult. And one of the things that in my preparation and as an anthropologist that I went through is you have to study in another culture, first of all, to understand your own. So the first step in becoming culturally neutral is understand your own biases. And then once you understand them, you're not going to get away from them, but you do have to do some things to neutralize them, like the gentleman or the lady says on the line there. You see, do you have another comment?
Yeah, the most important, I don't think it's possible to be culturally neutral if you're a living person. But the most effective means of trying to deal with that particular kind of dilemma is to really know yourself. If you know what your basic assumptions are and what motivates your behavior, you can at least identify value creep when you're working with dilemmas and people with different sets of assumptions. I think it's absolutely essential. You must know yourself in terms of what your own assumptions and values are.
Yes, and so one of the things that if anyone's interested in discussing this, we can make that one of the discussion threads in January, and I'll be happy to do that. And then I'll try to get some other people to come in and weigh in on it. Okay.
Okay, cool. So you might want to get, I know you have lots to share. So a couple of the points people were talking about is they wonder if government impacts the data, the fairness and trust of government. And also,
was that one of the questions from someone?
Yes, it was.
I actually had, and I won't tell you the country, but I actually had a study, I did a nationwide study related to the organizational culture of an industry, and it was shelved by the Prime Minister because they didn't want anybody to see the results. So, yeah.
Yeah, and someone else said, I wonder if courtrooms should pay more attention to the cultural differences or if there should be more focus from governments in integrating people into the culture and laws because of the universalism, particularism. Should culture be a factor in decisions made in the courtroom and in what way?
Yeah, of course, courtrooms are the result of cultural values as well in terms of how they're structured, how they work, and their purpose. So anyway, if we can move on now, I'm sure there's a lot more.
Yep,
okay.
Yep, no, that's good.
Okay. All right, social culture encounters are extremely important, and I'm going to just go through this very quickly because I've got a lot of examples I want to show you. I think it's more important for me to show you some examples than to just talk to you from the slides, but they're very important. You can see some examples of where one of the things that's common around the world is going into a meeting where you're a guest, and host and guest interaction is very common around the world and probably one of the best places to start identifying cultural differences and those related to it. I'm going to move on now. This is one of the first examples of a social culture encounter. This came from a company we were working with in the South Pacific, and they had an example that a policy holder in this financial services and insurance company had come in and asked for an exception to the rules. That's the dilemma we put out. And we said to them, what was reported to us rather was that the particular customer was a long-term policy holder, very well connected, and meant a lot of additional business perhaps to the company. The question was asked by the customer, can I have an exception to the rules and have a loan amount against my policy that's greater? And when that question was put out to everyone in the company to answer, how should it be handled, this is some of the results we got. As you can see, the first response, possible response, was Colonial has rules and no exception will be made. That's obviously universal. Everything's got to be the same. If you see on the bottom part there is number 4, make the exceptions and satisfy the customer. Now, we did this as part of a merger study between that company and a bank that they just acquired. Now, the universal particularism responses there are quite interesting between the companies and also between the way they saw it to be and the way they thought it should be. But the most important result we got out of this came when we looked at functional categories. Guess what side the accountants, which one of the responses the accounting people and finance people chose? Yes, the universalist response. Colonial has rules and no exceptions will be made. So that 99% of the people in the company, on both companies, said that we should take a universalist response. Number 4, you might note that that was a particular response, and in that particular case, we had most of the marketing, sales, and people like that were almost the opposite of the accountants. They were choosing that, I think around 82% in that group said we make the exception and satisfy the customer. Now, all this may sound good, but the following week after we presented this data to the executive committee, they had, the week before rather, they had a session where the executive group got away in secret and decided who they were and what their values were, and came up with a mission statement, which I think is quite funny. However, the mission statement said, we will strive to be the leaders in providing financial services that exceed our customers' expectations. Now, if we look in terms of the social culture encounter that we're seeing here, being one example of the company's overall mission and values and vision statements, what's the problem here? There's a disconnect. Because if you say Colonial has rules, exceptions, and none will be made, that goes in contrary to what the vision and value statement was of exceeding the customer's expectations. So you can see how one of the reasons why I like social culture encounters in this approach is it allows you to operationalize your vision and values and mission statements as well. And of course, the executive committee was somewhat embarrassed when they started thinking about what they put up on the board, because they realized they couldn't serve every customer to the point where they exceeded their expectations. It brought up quite a discussion, let me just say that. Cultural dilemmas, I'm going to give you some examples of them. We're constantly facing dilemmas, and Charles Hampton Turner has been a leader in this thought about looking at dilemmas as a way to understand organizations and leadership. And you can see the long-term, short-term, so forth. Now, one of the things from my own work is I did a project with the Department of Defense in the last 3 years in which we actually developed cultural assessments and cultural competency tools for the military. And you see there soldiers visiting a local village in Afghanistan. And what came up was a story where we had done 2 focus groups with soldiers who had been in overseas assignments as a means of gathering dilemmas to actually construct this particular questionnaire. And the purpose of the visit the soldiers described was to go into a village, meet with the elders, and locate areas in which the some weapons being used by the enemy to them were being stored. And so, of course, winning the cooperation of the village elders was very important. But when they went into the meeting, the first thing they were offered was a hookah pipe. And they suspected, and probably were correct, that the hookah pipe would have contained hashish. Now, what's the dilemma? Well, as the soldiers explained it to me, the dilemma was very simply that if they smoked the pipe, then they would probably have a better chance of gaining rapport with the village elders because they were accepting hospitality in a culturally appropriate way. But on the other hand, if they did smoke the pipe, they were violating U.S. regulations and probably going against the expectations in terms of policy of the local command they were part of. In this particular case of the soldier who told me about this particular dilemma that he had gone through, he did smoke the pipe, and he ended up, as he was leaving about 3 or 4 hours later, one of the village elders walked up to him and said, "You might want to look in the field over there. I think you'll find something you're interested in." So, as you can see, obviously that may have worked for him. Another soldier in the same focus group said, "I know someone who had the same situation, but when they were given the pipe or offered the pipe, they actually arrested the local Afghan elders and took them into the command post." As you can imagine, not a lot of good things came out of that particular thing. Now, these are operational issues that the soldiers are facing every day. What's the important thing is because the people who run the military in the U.S. and the Department of Defense what would they be their position on this? How much of an operational understanding would they have for this? So the dilemma is there's no right way out of this, but there's got to be some way for having to train and develop people so that they understand how to deal with situations in which there may not be an obvious answer, and the obvious answer, if it's their own, might not be the best thing for adapting to that situation. So understanding culture is part of becoming culturally adaptive, and that's one of the things we think is very important. It's not just to understand culture, but it's to understand culture in an adaptive way. I'm not going to go into these others because we're on time-wise. We need to move along a little, but you can see there's other things that came out of that study: promotion policy, working with locals, and so forth. All of them involve things like avoiding the tyranny of the or, which is a famous concept that came out when Built to Last, Collins and Pareus a number of years ago, which I think is great. Embracing the genius of the end, finding some way where you can take a dilemma with cultural opposites and come up with something that's going to work. Now, we've come to a point where I want to show you the first of two videos and then discuss them, okay? So if we could, John, you're going to help me with this thing, I think, right? With the giving them the Fierce Creatures video. You can see on there, look on your little pop-up box for GoToWebinar, and you'll see down in the chat room there's a link. If you can click on that link, it will open up the first video for you.
And we can also paste it into the chat room as well. And so for everybody out there, if you want to go to, in your GoToWebinar control panel, you go down to chats, and you'll see.
What I want you to do is take a minute and watch that video. If you can paste it in, open it up on your screen, and watch that video, and then whenever we're done, we'll discuss it. Fierce Creatures is the one you're looking at. You guys see it?
Sure, did you click on it?
Hang on, let me get it. Okay. Okay. Everyone get a chance to see it? John?
I think so. People get the
Everyone,
link.
everyone be able to see it? If not, hopefully you can look at it at another time.
People could see it. People could see it on your screen. Yes.
Good. All right. What was going on? Oh, from my screen. Great. What was going on in this meeting? Basically, we have a great example here of universalism, particularism. And John Cleese's character, of course, was coming from a larger corporation that had taken over this zoo, and he comes in and says 20% profit or else. And of course, the zoo employees are saying, but in a particularistic way, but we're different, and we have a different way of doing things, and we should be treated differently. So it's one of the better examples. And I think the great thing about once you learn the system of cultural dimensions and being able to identify these things, I see them all the time. Okay, I see these types of dilemmas. You pick up an ability to sense it. You are able to see and recognize where these cultural clashes come into play. We're going to see one more, if we can. Is it up there, John? Okay. And this is from Gung Ho, a movie that was from the late 80s, one of my favorite movies. And so if we can all click on that and take a look at that, we'll talk about it. It is an example of individual collectivism. Okay, I'm going to stop the video simply because if people want to see it, they can always look at it. We just have a few more minutes, and I don't want to take up enough time to see it all the way through. That was an individual collective dilemma because the Japanese expatriates who were helping with the factory were getting together to play with the Americans, and obviously you can see the differences in the way that they did things. The Japanese being very collective, and of course the local factory workers in Pennsylvania being very individualistic. And it's pretty easy to see, in not only in terms of strategy, but also in the way that they approach the game. Okay, now we've got time for a little bit of a wrap up here. It's very difficult to talk about all the things that I'd love to talk about. As someone asked me the other day, do you have the content ready? And I said, I've got enough content for about 3 or 4 weeks. But in doing an hour, I've put together some things that will hopefully whet your interest. There's lots of sources. We will be including a lot of materials, articles and videos and discussion chats and so forth in January 6th. And we, as I said, we'll leave that course site open for a month. and hopefully we'll be able to get a group of people together that have similar interests in understanding culture and would like to learn more about it and participate more with people of like mind and like interest. Let me just mention that the online course site, as I said, will be open January 6th. It's going to be available to anyone who's attended the workshop here or the webinar. It is going to be on a Blackboard course sites. You'll be getting the link to it. It's very simple to use. And we hope that we'll see people from the webinar and the workshop there. And we look forward to that. Credits. I want to thank my friend Dr. Tucci, who will be with us again tomorrow. I particularly want to thank Von Stropinaars and the Stropinaars Hampton Turner Group in Amsterdam. They've been invaluable in providing resources and support and very helpful. Ernie Wilson and Cheryl Van Dusen. Ernie Wilson's here with us and helped us with, particularly arrange the Aloha that we had earlier, and we're going to ask him to arrange the Aloha to close the ceremony too. But anyway, thank you very much for your time, and also thanks for John, Steve, Lena, and Dick for helping to produce this. And basically, that's it. Let me turn it over to Steve and see if you have questions from the chat room.
So what we'll do is we'll just do a quick checkout with everybody in the audience out in the chat room. If you could say what's one key word or a phrase or a takeaway that you got from the session today. What's one point you want to remember that was helpful to you? And as we check out, I wanted to say thank you again to you, Dr. Glover, and we look forward to talking with you tomorrow. We also would like to say thank you to ISOD, who is really doing a great job with Lena, helping to connect a lot of people around using the webinars and NEXUS and so forth. You can find out more, and you'll be able to connect with our presenters through the website, the site that's going to be set up on and go live on January 6th for discussion, and that'll give you a chance to connect in with them. There'll be a quick survey following this webinar, and please fill that out. And so in the chat room, a few people said, one, know yourself. Sherry says, Shines peel the onion view of culture. Thank you. PT says values as a fundamental to human behavior. Michelle says various approaches to assessing and measuring. Carl says cultural traps and how culture can be its own enemy, and so forth. So there's been a few of those comments as people are leaving. And Lena, do you want to say a final word and goodbye?
Just one thing, Steve, that I got to say. If anyone would like to have a dialogue about any of the things we've talked about, we're certainly open to talking with them prior to January 6th if anyone has a burning question or wants to talk. But normally we'll just set that for the 6th. But I'm certainly open to talking about issues online before then.
I think that's great, and I do think that if people post some questions in here, we can pose them in the discussion room. They can come on January 6th and can really connect with you, and between now and then, if they do, I'd love to draw them into that discussion, and if they could bring those to January 6th, that would be great.
Right.
So you have a nice, lively discussion there on the discussion room and all the different resources and features and other things you'll be providing at that site for the discussion today and tomorrow. And if you want to join us tomorrow, put on the link, sign up. You see it there on the slide. You can also go to NEXUS for Change and register there. And again, thank you, Jerry. Lena, any closing words?
Actually, one of the things that I think I'm really excited about is the resource room that Jerry and his colleagues have helped to create. The idea that it isn't just the webinar, but there's the opportunity for anyone, not just students, but anyone to participate post-webinar. I think that's a really great addition to this endeavor, and look forward to seeing people take advantage of that.
And don't be surprised if you do log in January to find people who are world authorities in the same discussion thread as you. I won't commit to it yet, but we're expecting to get some pretty good people in there.
So I just, and one last word, thank you again, NEXUS for Change and Bowling Green, Steve, Katie, and John Spalding working in the background. Thank you very much.
Okay, great. Thanks, everybody. Have a great rest of the day, and we will talk to you tomorrow. Bye.